This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. On this show, we talk to some of the leaders who are helping to create the future in OT and ICS security. And today I've got one of them, particularly in the electric sector, Dave Whitehead, who is the CEO of Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, SEL, as they're commonly known. He is now the CEO there. He's got his BS and MS in electrical engineering, an honorary doctorate degree, so many patents. You know, I tried to figure out how many patents you had. I kept seeing different numbers. It's somewhere over 80. You might have gotten one today for all I know of. But welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks, Dale. It's a pleasure to be here. I was just trying to think, how long have we known each other? It's like 15, 16, 17 years or something like that, I think, at this point.
Well, I remember vividly, I think, our first meeting, so we might get into that later.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that one too. I was thinking it was an airport.
Yes, it was. So you started with SEL back in, if I look at my notes here, 1994 as a hardware engineer.
Yep.
Obviously, Ed Schweitzer is a large presence there. He's the founder and namesake of it. Do you have any early memory or first memory of a significant interaction with Ed when you were a young hardware engineer?
I think the most vivid one I have is actually the interview. Back in the day, I was employee 124. The interview process, all the engineers had to interview with Ed. So you go through the morning, you do a software interview and a hardware interview, because I was a hardware engineer, and you just, it was brutal. I just got beat up by 3 or 4 guys in every meeting. And in the afternoon, you sat one-on-one with Ed, and he asked you to come into his office. He'd sit you down, and the first thing he'd always say is, to me, Dave, do you have any questions before we get started? And I said, well, Ed, it's probably said Dr. Schweitzer, but I said, Ed, it's a small company. There were only around 100 people at the company at the time. Where do you see the company in 5 or 10 years? And Ed's eyes light up, and he goes, great question. Come with me. And we walk through engineering, and we're going to do this. We walk through manufacturing. We're going to build all this stuff. We probably spent an hour of him telling me where he saw the company over the next handful of years. And he didn't ask me a single technical question. And I'm convinced today that's why I got the job here, is because he spent all the time talking, explaining where the company was headed, versus me trying to answer his hard questions.
Well, he is still very future focused. I noticed that. I had the opportunity to interview him on stage at S4, I think it was 2020, which was, to me, was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. He's quite a force of nature, and very lively and quick on his feet, and much funnier than I expected out there on stage. But it must have been a challenge. So you started in 1994 as a hardware engineer.
Yeah.
You moved up the chain, eventually led engineering and had a number of other roles. And then in 2019, slightly before COVID started, you get promoted to CEO. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was an interesting first year on the job as the CEO when you have a global pandemic hit. But we actually had our record selling year, so it all worked out.
Well, and I'm sure that was a huge issue, but one of the things we hear a lot about, and I've actually experienced, not as the CEO, but as, in senior management, the idea of when a founder, in your case, really a legend, is still with the organization, but kind of steps aside from the pinnacle of leadership. Maybe, do you have any examples or any thoughts on how that's helped you being CEO, having him around, and also maybe, I don't want to use the word hurt you, but some of the things that you had to overcome with such a large presence that people look at as the guiding light of the company still there?
Well, first of all, Ed is still going strong in the the company. He's the president. So I actually report to Ed still. And then we also have Ed as our chief technology officer. And, you've met Ed, and he is all about the technology and creating great solutions to make electric power safer, more reliable, and more economical. In fact, I get done with this interview, and he and I are going to go talk about some new products that he wants to get going developing. So from as a CEO, and we have such a long history, 27 years plus working together. It's a mentor-mentee sort of relationship. So I think I'm very, very fortunate to have such a smart guy. You've seen him in a public venue, and that guy's a rock star, right? People just love to sit and talk with him. So it's really fun to be able to go out to places, and Ed knows everybody, and have him talk about different things, technology, cybersecurity, whatever it might be. In Ed's role now as president and CTO, this really allows him a lot more time to think about new technologies, developing stuff, working on new algorithms. And I get to run our global operations. So setting strategy, working on sales, HR, a lot of stuff they never taught me in engineering school. I'm working on. I can tear apart a P&L spreadsheet like nobody's business now. But so it's great. I got Ed, who's got 40 plus years in this business, to be that. Hey Ed, what do you think about this? What do you think we should be doing? And he'll give me his guidance. From a hindrance standpoint, you're to a degree, you're always, SEL will always be remembered for Ed Schweitzer. So you kind of walk in his shadow just a little bit when it comes to working here at SEL, being the CEO of the company, when Ed is such a dominant force in our industry. But all in all, it's great. I love being able to shoot him an email, call him. I'm gonna sit down in a meeting, have lunch with him today. So it's fabulous. I'm probably one of the luckiest CEOs there are in the country.
I'm sure that 27 years makes a big difference, as opposed to being someone brought in from the outside to try to deal with, because you understand the culture, you understand the man, you understand a lot of the other leaders. So I'm sure that's a big help.
Yeah, growing up with the company certainly does. I like to say I've probably done just about everything you can at SEL, from designing hardware to emptying waste baskets to, probably washing some of the company cars too.
Well, especially when there were 124 employees, then you have to wear quite a few hats. Just one other question along those lines. So Ed's 74.
Yeah.
I don't want to be morose, but at some time he might get tired of working. What is the company doing to prepare for life post Ed being actively involved like he is today?
Well, I always make the joke that I'm probably going to retire before Ed does, right? Just given his passion for this industry. But
well, he could be like Warren Buffett, still going strong in his 90s. So
yeah, and who's Warren Buffett's friend?
Charlie Munger. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think he's
exactly.
like 98
He's even
or
older,
99.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
But if you go look at my direct report, so our chief sales and services officer, Dave Casello, he's got probably 25 years at the company. Our HR person has 20 plus years. Our CFO has 24 years. So all of us that are in our senior management roles, I'll argue we're kind of a family, and have all grown up together. When it comes to our engineering group, most of our senior leadership has 20 plus years at SEL and in the industry. So when you look at where all the good ideas going to come from, how we're going to execute on our plans, I feel really good about our management group and where we've headed, how long we've worked together. Rarely do we bring somebody from the outside. As you pointed out, culture and the way we do things, SEL is probably different or more unique, if you will, than other companies. So since we've all grown up with each other, we all understand, how we want to go about doing things, how we want to serve our industry, and it's working really, really well.
Okay, well, it's a fascinating company, and you are different in a lot of areas. We might even hit a few of those as we talk about this. But let's talk about, this is a security podcast. Most of the people listen to the show, for ICS security and OT matters. And while it's far from your main product line, over the years, over the past decade or so, you have developed a number of security products, software-defined network products, perimeter security products like your gateways, your RTACs, some cellular security, even some serial security products. When you look at your security product line on its own, kind of if it were a standalone business unit, Do you see that as a profitable business unit today? And maybe what's your forecast for a business unit like that within SEL in the future?
Well, I look at security, cybersecurity in particular, I guess, it's just part of a product. If we're going to put communication or automation type features in there, I don't see how you couldn't address cybersecurity, especially these days. So when we're thinking about, how we go about protecting those cyber ports or assets, it falls into the same kind of engineering problem as how do I quickly detect when there's a fault on the power system. I don't think I can divorce cybersecurity from any of the other functions just from purely an engineering standpoint. From a cybersecurity business, it's not certainly not our biggest business, just because the protection side of our business
Sure.
has a 27-year head start, if you will. Though I will say Ed had the foresight. He worked for the U.S. government prior to starting SEL, and he has a deep appreciation for cybersecurity. When I first started working here, I just go, Ed, why did you put these 2 levels of user passwords into the products? And he says, well, because I also put a communication port, and I don't want anybody just plugging in a computer trying to change the settings in a relay. So we've always had an appreciation for cybersecurity, even in the early days. Certainly now with the advent of Ethernet and IP based things, the convergence, if you will, or the attempted convergence of IT and OT together, we have to be really, really concerned about it. I don't think I'm not trying to be paranoid about cybersecurity. I just treat it as one of our engineering, things we need to address when we're building a particular product. Do I think cyber could be a much bigger product line for us? Last year, what we ended up doing was actually setting up a cybersecurity group. So typically we've organized in verticals. We have manufacturing, we have application support, we have engineers that build stuff, and they're all in their own silos. They do a pretty good job of collaborating with each other. But cyber is such a unique and growing field, and it's a little bit different than our protection business or automation business, that we decided to stand up our own cyber group that has its own engineers, its own application engineers, its own teaching group that goes out and explains how the various product work. And they're really a standalone entity. We're kind of doing this as a little mini experiment because it is such a unique and different from our core businesses and running. And it's very profitable too, right? People need cybersecurity. People are looking for ways to secure their systems. And we'll see, I'll come on your show next year. You can ask me how the new group is doing after about a year and a half or so of being in business by itself.
Well, it's interesting because you threw in there that it was very profitable. I was going to ask you if it had its own P&L that you're going to track. Obviously, you're a private company. You don't share those numbers with us, but you do track it. And because the other option would have been, rather than developing these products, there are vendors that make similar products. I guess with the SDN, you sort of partner, right, with Veracity or some company.
We don't do a lot of investing in other companies. We're usually an organic type of company, but we have made a couple of investments in companies. One was a Veracity, and they do SDN controllers, mainly targeted at automation plant floors, like a Chrysler, a Ford, a GM, a Procter and Gamble. Those kind of they have a little bit of different workflow and work process requirements than say a substation does. Right. We certainly have our own flow controller for SDN, and the nice thing about it is, it's you separate the hardware and the software, and it's easy to write a controller then that does particular things you need done for various different industries. The other one we've made a small investment is in Dragos too, with Rob Lee and his group. We see, I see a lot of cool things that his sensors could do with SDN. So let's assume somebody's coming in and scanning through, say, DNP, or maybe they use Modbus or 61850, and the network's not even supposed to have that type of traffic flowing on it. We could pass that along to Rob's sensors. They can say, hey, you know what, let's shut down DNP or whatever's coming in on this particular port. And that's an easy thing to do with SDN. So I think there's a lot of automation that can happen when it comes to cybersecurity for keeping OT networks secure.
And I guess the development of products as a whole is in line with the as you say, the organic nature of the company in terms of even building some of the components and doing, like I saw you had a new printed circuit board factory that you're doing, and things that are a little atypical for many manufacturers to do more of that work in-house as opposed to hiring other people to do that work.
Yeah, I think what we always believe, but I think a lot of people are learning during the global pandemic, is that this concept of GIT manufacturing. If everything is going good, I can see how that really benefits, right? You can be really lean when it comes to how much product or raw materials you have sitting on your shelf. But what we found is, you get a little blip in the supply chain and everything falls apart. So we've taken the attitude, instead of just in time, it's just in case. So we've really extended bought a lot more raw material sitting on our shelves than we had, say, just a year and a half ago. And what that allowed us to do is we haven't missed a single shipment due to unavailable material during the entire pandemic. And, it used to be you get a lot of questions from customers regarding cybersecurity. The latest ones I get are, you guys going to be able to still continue to ship us products? And unlike the automotive industry, we have been able to manage our supply chain. It's been a challenge. I probably spend half an hour each day going over our problem parts list just to make sure we know where we're at. And if I got to make phone calls or figure out what other options are to get parts in, that's what we've been doing.
I want to get back to the security products, but let's go down this thread a little bit.
Okay.
So you, as I mentioned, I was shocked that I think it was in Moscow, Idaho, that you're building a factory for printed circuit boards. And I can understand the issues related to being confident that you can deliver the products to your customers.
Yeah.
Having larger inventories, having more control over the supply chain. But you've seen in the government, in the industry, in the press and media, a lot of concern about supply chain security in terms of people inserting things into the supply chain. How much do you think you're actually getting in terms of addressing that concern for customers by this level of integration? Because you're not making chips yet, are you?
We are not
fabbing chips.
We are not making chips. Who knows? Give me another couple of years. Maybe we'll get a foundry going. I know Intel and others are going to put in some big foundries in the U.S. Back to the PCB factory that we're in the process of building, is we've always designed our PCBs, but we've had them fabricated at shops around the U.S. We tend to keep all our supply chain as close to us as possible. And so when we were looking at where's the best place to vertical integrate, where perhaps could we improve the quality, maybe the delivery time, certainly the supply chain security aspect of it. PCBs are probably our second largest cost that go into a hardware platform. It's our most highly engineered part of the design. And it just made a lot of sense. And our CFO sat down and ran some numbers, and we'll actually be saving, I forgot what the number is, but quite a bit of money by being able to fab these products, or the circuit boards just 7 miles away from us over in Moscow, Idaho. So it's we get to control the quality. The engineers get to be really close to the process. We're going to save money. So it just makes sense. And then, I do have a lot of U.S. customers that really appreciate the fact that we can assemble everything here in the U.S. and the more stuff that is made in the USA gives them a little bit more confidence in when we start talking about supply chain interdiction and the challenges that might pose to us.
Yeah, I guess it does reduce the number of places where it could be interdicted, or where rogue engineers could insert something into the system.
Yeah.
Doesn't eliminate it, but
Nope.
It's certainly something that you can say is helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the flip side to it is the hardware, is the software side. There's we tend to write all our own code, especially in our embedded products. There's some PC software stuff where you use libraries and what have you. But for the real time control of the power system, all that code is written here at SEL within the United States. So that's another plus, if you will.
And you're not still manufacturing your own computers, are you? I know for a while there
We
you
do.
were doing that. You still do
We
that?
build our own power supplies. Yeah, we're this crazy company that loves to build stuff. I
Yeah.
think that I hope that comes back into vogue pretty soon, given all the challenge we've had during COVID and supply chain.
Okay, let's get back to the security products.
Okay.
This was as I knew I was going to talk to you. I was trying to think about parallels here. So you've started out, SEL started out protection and other products for the electric sector.
Yep.
And you would never sell an unsafe product, right? In fact, your
Correct.
products are on the flip side. They're to make the system safe
Yep.
for people and reliable and such, and prevent physical damage, all the things that they do in protection and safety. Security is a little different in the sense that you make security products, and let's say I grant that they're good products. I'm not putting my blessing on them, but I believe that you're putting out good products. You're trying to put out good, secure products. But a lot of your customers choose not to use them. And how do you deal with that? Because you would never give them a system that was unsafe, but just because of the way the products are, you could sell them a system that is not secure because they chose not to take advantage of the security, let's say the security product overlay that can be
Yep.
made available. How do you deal with, which I guess would still be a large percentage of your clients that say, we're not going to do that now, maybe later for security?
Yeah, and talking to our customers and asset owners, they certainly have a unique challenge that perhaps an automation factory floor doesn't have. Right, they're not going to do a rip and replace on their systems every 4 years. The scale of what they have, they've got products that are working just fine, performing their primary functions that are 20 years old, 10 years old, spread out all over the place. And so that's one challenge they have. I think the other one they have is that maybe is not necessarily completely unique to our industry, but that this regulatory component too, right? Everybody is concerned about the safety of the electric grid, and so they're going to get a lot of help, probably more help than any other critical infrastructure I can think of, probably more than oil and gas. Banking has a lot more oversight, but certainly when it comes to process control and things like that, the electric sector. So they have a lot of regulation on them. And one of the challenges they have is, let's assume a utility A says, I'd really like to use SDN or some other cybersecurity feature or something like that. The one thing they have to make sure of, or one of the things that's certainly on their mind is, will it be compliant with whatever the cybersecurity regulations are in place at that time? Because otherwise, they're not going to be able to put it into their rate case and what have you. So, trying to make sure that whatever the regulatory environment is still encouraging, innovation and what have you to keep, because the bad guys are innovating at a tremendous pace, right? And sometimes our regulation can put, I think, a little bit of handcuffs on how fast the good guys can innovate or deploy new solutions. And so when I'm sitting talking to a customer, it's finding that balance of how do you keep systems cyber secure, given the constraints with very large systems they can't rip and replace, regulations that are going on, and I think in a lot of cases we are seeing ways to justify. You talked about SDN. It's a technology that's probably been out from us for about 4 years. I am convinced SDN will be the network for industrial control systems. It's deny by default right out of nobody talks to anybody until you set up the rules, versus another a traditional switch where everybody talks to everybody until you put the rules in place to stop the communication you don't want. And we're seeing people embrace this new SDN technology. That's just one of many. Our industry is a little bit conservative, if you will. Maybe I don't want to say slow to adopt new technologies, but rightfully so, right? They need to keep the lights on to millions of people around the country, and billions of people in some places around the world. So they just don't want to jump into this newest technology that would cause something not to work, the lights to go out. So it's an interesting challenge we have in the electric sector.
I'd agree with you on the SDN. what is becoming a large, more amorphous term, zero trust, is getting huge mind share now in the government and the regulatory agencies. And certainly SDN is one of the approaches to achieve zero trust. So you might see some of that. There is that question of regulatory versus enlightened self-interest.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in the electric sector with NERC SIP. It certainly raised the floor, but I would say for a lot of vendors, it lowered, or a lot of asset owners, it lowered the ceiling, because they had to spend resources on all this compliance stuff that then were unavailable to do the things they wanted to do. And it becomes price. Do you have any feel like when you sell a system, let's say you're putting in a big system, do you have any feel for the premium an asset owner would pay for security? Is it 10%? Is it 30%?
Just
Or
from the
zero?
devices itself.
If like the project cost, if this project is going to cost us this amount of money to put out, and we can allocate a certain percentage for security.
I think, and I'm guessing it's a good question. I probably have to scratch my head a little bit harder, but let's just take, I need a network switch in my system to connect devices. I could use SDN. There's a great security device. It doesn't cost anymore, right? So that part's a push. Maybe putting an extra gateway in there, that's probably 5% of the project, if you will. It's not all that much, I don't think, in the big scheme of things. And then I think you pointed out a little bit earlier too, is taking advantage of all the security features that already exist in products. I think if you do that you can get really probably good cybersecurity without a lot of additional costs. It's just a different way of doing things. And maybe you mentioned earlier too, there's this IT OT thing, like who owns it, who's responsible for it. This guy designing the system, or gal that's designing this new substation, if you will, it takes quite an individual to do a good job. If we're talking about the person putting it together, has to be a power system expert. He has to be an automation expert. He has to be a communication expert. And now he needs to be a cybersecurity expert. It's, my goodness, that's a unicorn you're looking for when it comes to putting all this stuff together. It's quite a challenge we have in our industry.
Maybe just one last question on this, because the way you're describing it is interesting. It sounds like you're not seeing expense as really the thing that's stopping people. Is it more the ongoing effort, or I'm introducing another thing that adds complexity and could cause something to not work?
I think it's complexity. I think there's, we're doing a much better job, I think, but I think it's also an education thing. Mm-hmm. And then working with the manufacturers like us, working with the asset owners like the utilities, and then working with government so that we're all on the same page about what are the threats, what can we do to mitigate them, and how do we all work together, as a team versus, I won't call it adversaries or frenemies, but all working towards the same goal, which I think we do. It usually comes down to the details of how do we execute this in a quick and efficient manner.
Okay. I want to get now to vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And it's tied a little bit to our first meeting, and I'm sure a lot has changed since then. We did Project Basecamp back in 2012 on 5 or 6 different popular level 1 devices, one of which was an SEL device. Now, to your credit, you guys did much better than most. Most of them were, I think Reed described it as a bloodbath. SEL had, instead of having a bunch of red X's, had mostly some yellow marks, and there was, I think, a vulnerability related to like a 3rd level password or something that was hidden into the system. And I remember at the time, vulnerabilities were still very new to the ICS world.
Yep.
And you and the team there weren't very happy that we disclosed that vulnerability, and actually told us, hey, you can never do that again. Now, that you may be right that shouldn't have been done. That there's the vulnerability argument, disclosure argument is one that's gone on for decades.
Yep.
In IT and now in OT for at least a decade. What is the right way to disclose it? What is the right thing for the vendor to do? But we are in a world now where really the person that finds it has the decision what they're going to do with it, right or wrong. You know, you may agree with what they do, you may disagree what they do, but we've seen now, and I think the OT world is much more aware of this than they were in 2012, that you can't control what people do with these things once they're out there. So on a long road here to a question, now that you're in this world where you see, hey, it's software and firmware, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to do our best to remove vulnerabilities, but there will be some. Even the best coders put some vulnerabilities in there. How is your feeling about, or how is your programmer feeling about how to deal with vulnerabilities when they get found, changed since 2012?
Well, that's a great. Just like everybody else in the industry, I'd argue that we've evolved too. So, you know, the incident you're talking about, I remember we flew down to Utah at a FBO and had a conversation in a lobby. And I remember that what we were discussing is we have passwords that are default. They're not hard coded. You can change them whenever you want to, but there's a excuse me, a cal level password that we didn't explicitly define in the instruction manual. And, you know, we took some, you know, you have to go through a couple different passwords before you could even change that one. Mm-hmm. You know what? And at the end of the day, based on that conversation, we actually did say, you know what, we should put that in our instruction manual. People should know about it so they can go and address that particular cyber condition, right? So we evolved. When I first did it, I was probably an angry guy kind of thing. This was new cybersecurity for us in terms of broadly disclosing stuff and how to go about it. Since the beginning of the company, what we've done is we've kept really meticulous records of where all of who buys our products, and then what firmware versions they have if we send out new firmware versions to them. And so we have with this great database, if we discover a problem, whether it's a cyber or any other kind of problem, we can put together a letter and directly contact the asset owner and said, hey, dear Mr. Customer, you have the product X, Y, or Z. We found an issue or a problem with it. We recommend you upgrade to these particular firmware versions. And that has worked really well for us over the 40 years we've been in business. We don't do them very often, but when they do, it's a great way to us to contact the customer directly. And I think in our industry, it's a little bit easier to do versus me selling cell phones or Microsoft, where I have no idea where this stuff is going to end up. So how I would go about deploying security vulnerability patches or something like that is probably a lot different in other industries than what we're able to do in ours. So moving past just, hey, say a distance element didn't operate quite the way we thought it was. Here's a way to enhance your protection. Moving on to cyber, we use the exact same, and we still do today, process for, hey, we found a cybersecurity vulnerability. Let's go and talk to our customers about it. Now, what we have done over the last handful of years is really speed up the process. No longer is it okay to have, say, one of our application engineers or one of our salespeople reach out to a customer, because, you know, we just don't have that kind of time with cybersecurity anymore. So we've automated the process where if you what we've done is automate that process. So if you've bought a product for us, you can sign up for security vulnerabilities, and we will push out an email to you as soon as one is identified, and you can come and get the impacted product or security version. The other thing we've done for our customers too is not only we tell you have one, but we also tell you when you haven't had one. You know, from NERC SIP, they have to every month, you know, are there any security vulnerabilities? So what we do is if you have one of our products, we'll send you out a notification every month saying, hey, there were no security problems. Or if there were, we'll say, hey, there was a security problem. You should be aware of that. So you can put those, our customers can put those into those records. But fundamentally, we don't post these things out on the website. We don't need to inform, you know, 1 billion people about cybersecurity problems on our products if you don't own one. So we've kept it really customer focused, really tight, kept the who needs to know as small as possible. If you need to know, we're happy to put you on our email list for these security vulnerabilities, but keeping the information as tightly held as reasonably possible has been our process. It's the speed with which now that we can deploy information more of say in a handful of days to the exact same day that we find out about it, there's a new firmware available to address an issue.
So just if I understand you right, so then you would not necessarily, SEL would not tell, for example, ICS CERT if you found something. You would just go directly to your customers rather than
That
rely
that
on ICS CERT to inform them.
that's generally been our process. We have worked with ICS CERT on a handful of items, but generally we just take care of this ourselves, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from our customers too. You know, keeping information as private as possible.
Well, you could always run into the case where some jerk who runs a conference puts out a vulnerability and then ICS finds out about it, right?
These things can happen. To your point, people will find things in there, and we manage those things.
Yeah, well, sure.
These days, I don't get too upset about it. I think generally a lot of people have the best intentions. There's some people that probably don't, but most people have the best intentions of keeping industrial networks secure.
Well, and I do know that there's certainly some people who find vulnerabilities are very skeptical about the company actually contacting their customers. I'm
Yeah.
not saying in your case that you're not, but I know many vulnerability researchers say, hey, if I don't see it in public, I don't believe it. So you
Yeah.
are going to run into some hesitancy there. Whereas others that trust the company may choose to let you go down that path. One last thing on that, Eric Byers told me when they had a vulnerability with Tofino, back when he was doing the Tofino industrial gateway, they had a vulnerability. It was announced. They fixed it. They issued a patch. They sent a notice out to all their known customers, and then they tracked the downloads. And I can't remember the actual number, but he was saying they were seeing, I think it was like around 20% of their customers were actually downloading and loading the patch. Do you have any feel for how many people are actually updating your products? You know, not necessarily in a month, but like on an annual basis or something like that.
I don't have exact numbers. I have some anecdotal conversations or evidence that when we issue, we call these service bulletins. If we issue a service bulletin, by and large, our customers are going to take advantage of those things. One is because we don't issue them very often. If we do, it's something our customers should take notice of. Two is, I think, from the NERC SIP, if we were to disclose something, the utility has an obligation then to evaluate it to see if it's going to impact their systems. And generally, depending on what the vulnerability is, setting configurations, how their systems are applied in their networks, they'll generally go ahead and do an upgrade for them. I don't know too many people would just say, there's an upgrade. I'm not gonna do anything about it.
Well, that would be different. That would be different for your products than like a typical level 1 product that we would see out there. Like we rarely see PLC firmware updates or things like that. But you're saying in your industry, it's considered necessary if a bulletin goes out?
Yeah, the utility is under an obligation then, depending if it's what level of criticality the substation is and the equipment's installed in that substation, that they are, they're obligated to go evaluate what the cybersecurity problem is, and then evaluate how it may or may not impact their particular systems. And if it impacts them, they'll go ahead and do an upgrade.
This is under the NERC SIP regulations, You're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
But then all the people that aren't covered under that maybe have their own procedure, right?
Yeah, that is true.
Whether they're smaller and don't fall under the medium or high, or whether they're international.
That is correct. And the things we do too is when we give these service bulletins, we just don't say you must upgrade. We'll give you, under these particular conditions, this is where you need to be concerned. If you don't meet these type of conditions, then, you can wait for a regular upgrade, or whenever it's more convenient versus, you got to roll a bunch of trucks to go do a firmware upgrade.
Okay. I want to hit two other things quickly. The first one I think is real fast. As most of the industry is, I'm hugely impressed by your warranty. Basically 10 years, we'll fix it, that sort of thing. Where does vulnerability, or let's say security related updates fall? Is that in the 10 years? Is that in the forever? Where does that fall? Generally,
it's in the forever category. We feel an immense obligation to our industry, our customers, people who rely on electric power to ensure that our products are cyber secure and safe. So I can't say for forever and ever, but right now, if there's a problem with our particular products, we'll work with the customers, either give you a new firmware upgrade or figure out or how else you might mitigate the cyber concern.
Okay. And then the last thing would be the idea of putting in features, security features into your existing product line. And we saw Microsoft was a great example of this issue when they started their secure computing initiative in the early 2000s, that they had this huge set of legacy code out there that, they had to work their way through. And you've got all these products, and quite frankly, you promote that these products practically last forever.
Yeah.
Right. I think even the one that we looked at in 2012 was like 2 generations old from the current product. So you have this, and I looked at, for example, the firmware integrity issue. And I looked on your site. In a perfect world, you would have all your firmware digitally signed, and the device would verify the digital signature before it accepted it.
Yep.
And you have some products that do that, and then you have other products where the firmware just has a checksum attached to it. How are you dealing with the issues and the decisions about where to actually add basic security features like that, or secure boot, or support for a secure protocol into your product line?
Yeah. So certainly going forward, all of the new products have things like being able to accept a signed piece of firmware and then validating that before it goes and loads it on. As we talked about, certainly we have products that are 10, 20 plus years old, and they just don't have those kind of cryptographic functions in them. They're probably, the processor's probably running at 80% burdened. And so doing a lot of heavy cryptography without crypto engines and things like that is a little bit more difficult. And that's why we have done things for customers. It's like SEL, if you go out to our website, we will have signed versions of our firmware. So if you download it, you can run your own checksum on it to make sure that it's really an SEL piece of code. And so then you can use your controls at the utility to take that downloaded, verified piece of code and then put the new version into a relay. So we're enhancing these things, things that we can do that are simple, easy to provide cybersecurity enhancements, if you will, features, stuff that you do with yourself that aren't going to put a lot of more burden than on an old legacy product. And we continue to scratch our heads and figure out what are the other ways we can help customers out to ensure that their products are original SEL software, original SEL hardware, and what have you.
Okay. Now, if someone wanted to stay abreast of your thinkings and ideas of this, obviously you have your Schweitzer Drive podcast, right? That comes out about, it seems like about bi-weekly or something like that. You're in season 2 of that. I've enjoyed a number of those episodes. Is there any other thing that you track? Are you active in any of the socials, or how would anyone that wants to keep in touch with you do that?
Yeah, our One Schweitzer Drive podcast comes out, as you said, every 2 or 3 weeks. It's a great way to catch up on all kinds of things that have to do with power system, from cybersecurity to a whole bunch of other things. We're active in LinkedIn. You can follow me on that. We tweet a lot of, or you don't tweet on LinkedIn. We tweet also, but I got a Twitter account too. That timely things that are happening, whether it's power system protection or cybersecurity and other things too.
And just to finish off, was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch related to security, or did I do such a great job as an interviewer? We covered everything.
Well, Dale, of course you did a great job on the interview. You and I could probably talk about this for the next 4 hours if we wanted to. I just like to comment, Dale, we've known each other for a long time. Maybe we don't agree on everything all the time, but I think you've done a lot for our industry to bring light into the importance of cybersecurity. You're probably the first ones to stand up, saying, hey, we need to be really concerned about this. It's one thing to have my files encrypted on my laptop. It's a totally different thing for controlling an oil refinery or an electric power system and ensuring that these systems are cyber secure, especially these days, right? When you've got so many different folks from, the economic side to the, state sponsored, folks trying to get into networks and things like that. This is truly an important topic, and I'm really appreciative of all the light you bring to this such an important topic. And look forward to going to. Hopefully I can go to S4 this year too.
I hope you can as well. Tickets go on sale on September 1st. Shameless plug.
It's a great plug.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. If you see Ed later today, tell him I said hi, and everyone take a chance and listen to Schweitzer Drive. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks very much, Dale. Appreciate it.